In this example problem, we're going to be a company that has a data set of the last 200 transactions they've conducted with their customers. We are being asked as the data analytics staff to go through and look at the different points that we have in here to find the frequency and relative frequency of our customers on whether they were returning customers or not. The frequency and relative frequency of our customers to figure out how many identify as male versus female, and the frequency and relative frequency of our customers based upon their income level. So the first 2 points are pretty easy because they're binary, if you will. This is going to be yes or no response, either they're returning or they're non-returning. And for this example, and by the way, I didn't make this data set, I took it from the publisher. All of the respondents identify as male or female, so that happens to be just 2 answers in here. But in real practice, you could definitely have a third option for non-binary as well. But for income down here, we have so many different numbers we could possibly have. We can't say the number of people that made 30,000 versus 31,000 versus 32,000. You're going to have a crazy amount of information parts to have to work with if you do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to, as they call it, bin them. We're going to come up with a set of equal ranges and throw people into groups. And we're going to do it by 50,000. So the first bin, the first grouping will be $0 to $50,000. The second one will be 50,000 to $1 to 100,000, so on and so forth. So for all of this, we're going to crunch the numbers to figure out what percentage, if you will, of our customers meet these conditions. And because a picture is worth 1,000 words, we're also going to visualize some of this data. So we'll have a nice little chart. If we had to have a write-up for someone to use, that chart is going to say a lot of things more effectively than thousands of words of information, because you can just look at it and extract meaning from it yourself. So with our knowledge of what we need to do, let's move over to the Transactions tab. On the Transactions tab, we have this list. It is our last 200 transactions. It goes all the way down to 200, as you can see down here. And for each of those transactions, we have the number, how much the transaction was for in terms of dollars spent, what the customer satisfaction was on a scale of 1 to 5, whether they were a repeat customer or not, whether they identified as male or female, and what their income level was in thousands. So customer 1 makes $53,000 a year, etc. Let's start figuring out what the frequency of these conditions are and how much of our total customer base that frequency is. So I'll start by figuring out how many customers we have in the set. Well, the information said that we have 200, but let's just make sure that we do indeed have 200 lines on this, 200 data points. And the easiest way to do that is to count it. So if you go to insert function, you can grab a count function. And if you hit go, and as you can see, there's a whole bunch of different subsets of this. Count, the basic function, just counts how many returns there are in a particular information point. The only problem with the count function is it only works for variables that are measured in numbers. So it would work here for customer and purchase and satisfaction because the returns are all numbers. But it can't count things that are qualitative, like yes or no, like male or female. Now here, we're going with customers, so I could use the count function if I wanted to. But the second function down, count A, works with both quantitative and qualitative variables. So by default, I just always use it because I don't understand the point of using count when I could just use count A for both. So I'm going to pick the count A function, and I'm going to hit OK. And value 1 is the range of values that I want to count. I want to count how many customers we have, so I'm going to click on cell A2, the first one we have, and grab the entirety of column A, so it should be A2 to A201. And I'm going to hit OK. And it's going to tell me that there are 200 customers, so that's the number we're supposed to have. We just made sure that they're all there. Let's break that down by how many of those customers are repeat customers or not. In this case, I don't want to use count because it'll just give me, count A will just give me the number of responses that I have, and it'll say 200. Well, 200 is not going to be yes because I see we already have no's in there. I only want to count the number of customers in this line if they responded yes to being a repeat customer. And the function for that is COUNTIF. So I'm going to go find COUNTIF. There's if in ifs. Ifs is multiple conditions that have to be met. Since we only have one thing right here, no or yes, we only have one condition we're looking for. I'm going to use the singular COUNTIF. The range is going to be the same way. grab all of the information points you have in the column that you're looking for. So for repeat customer or not, I want all the information points in column D from cells D2 all the way down to D201. I'm going to shortcut with that Control Shift down keybind, and I'm going to hit this little guy and scroll back up to the top. There we go. But I want this if they said yes, and that's our criteria. So in quotations, type in the criteria that you're looking for. I'm only looking for people that responded yes. So my range is D2 to D201. My criteria is yes, and I hit OK. And I find that 140 of those 200 customers were indeed repeat customers. And a little simple math in my head tells me that I should have 60 no's. If 140 people are, repeat customers, the other 60 out of this 200 should be first-time customers. But let's check it out. And you can just type it in. Equals count if, open a parenthesis. We know our range is going to be all the returns we had in column D, so D2 to D201. And in this case, scrolling back up to the top on the side, I want the condition, the criteria here to be that they responded no. So I'm going to put no in quotations and close the parenthesis and hit enter. And yes, indeed, we have 60 people that are first-time, non-repeating customers. Let's use that same process to find out what portion of our customer base, at least according to our last 200 transactions, identifies as male versus female. It's the COUNTIF function. One more time. Our range now will be everything in column E because that's the column that we have as information about the sex of the customers from our last 200 purchases. I hit the Control Shift bind key down to grab cells E2 to E201, and the condition that I want right now in this first one is male. So I'm going to put that in quotation marks, close the parenthesis, and hit enter. 150 of the last 200 customers we have identified as male, so math tells me that 50 of them should identify as female, and the COUNTIF function is going to prove that. So equals COUNTIF. My range is still all the returns that I have for E, E2 to E201, and my condition for this one is going to be female. And yep, there's 50. So what's the relative frequency? It's a fancy way of saying what percent of our customers met this criteria. What percent of our customers were repeat customers? And you can find that. How do you find the percent out of anything? Take the number of responses that you had that met that criteria, 140, and divide by the total size of your sample, 200. So if you take 140 and divide by 200, you come up with 0.70. 70% of our customer base from our last 200 transactions were repeat customers. Do that same concept for no. Take the 60 people that were not repeat customers, divide by your 200 customer sample size, and you get 30%, 0.30. And those two will add up to the full 100%, so you've accounted for all the possibilities that you could have. Relative frequency, for reasons unbeknownst to me, is always expressed in decimal form, so you would leave it as 0.70 and 0.30, but you can always think of it as 70% of the customer base and 30% of the customer base. Let's do the same thing down here for male or female. I am going to divide the 150 customers that responded that they identify as male by the 200 person sample size, and 75% of our respondents, if you will, in this sample of customer transactions were male customers. Do the same thing for female. 50 divided by 200, that's the other 25% that adds up to the full 100%. We've accounted for the entirety of our possibilities there. So now you could go through and do a big fat write-up in here about the breakdown of our customer base, and we see that a huge portion of our customer base are returning customers, so our customers appear to be loyal. And also, we are a very male demographic based business that we have. And you can go on, you can write all this out in words, 150 out of 200 customers identified as male, and you can pass along, and there's nothing wrong with that. But to make things much easier, you can always just throw a graph in, and it'll allow people to look at it and see that information much easier than having to read through paragraphs of text. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make a frequency distribution of repeat versus non-repeat customers. And I know the information I'm going to want is from cells H3 over to I4. Yes or no, and how many people responded in that particular way. And when I have those highlighted, all of that, I'm going to go to Insert. The top left corner is our bar and column area. I'm going to click the little down arrow, and I'm going to take the one in the top left corner, which is this clustered column. And now we got something that resembles frequency distribution, visualized data right here. Just to pretty this up a little bit, I'm going to go to the chart elements, and I'm going to hit axis titles. Down here on the x-axis, I think the yes or the no kind of speak for themselves if we properly title this chart. So I'm going to delete this guy right out of here. And then over here, what is this going to be? Well, we could say number of customers, but in a frequency distribution by default, it's always easy just to type in frequency. And now let's properly label our chart. What is our chart up here? This is our repeat customer frequency distribution, if I could spell. There we go. And Alexis guy on the side that popped up. So that right there is a perfectly fine looking chart. People can look at this and see there's 140 people that were returning customers, and over here that's 60 were not. It's a pretty tall graph with only 2 data points in here. We're counting by 20s. You could leave that the way that it is and it's perfectly fine. Or if you wanted to, you could change around the bounds of your y-axis to just change the way that the information looks. So I'm going to click on this. I'm going to right click and I'm going to format this axis. And the bounds on the top is the range that you have. So we're going from 0 to 160. Units, major, is the intervals. And we see here that we're counting by 20s. Maybe I just want to make this a little smaller and I want to get a number that, you know, can be evenly spread out, that's going to contain all the information points that we have with 140 yeses and just 60 no's. Let's count by 50s. So I'm going to put major in as 50 and hit enter, and it changes my axis over here. So I have just the frequency by 50. Either way works. It's totally fine, whatever you wish. But it is one potential option. Let's do the same thing for male versus female. So just like before, I'm going to grab the 2 possible outcomes and their frequencies. I'm going to highlight all of them. I'm going to go to data. I'm going to go to insert. I'm going to go to the column and bar chart, and I'm going to grab the clustered column from the top left corner. And again, there's our return here. Let's throw in those elements. Axis titles. I'm going to delete out the bottom one. I'm going to change the y-axis so it says frequency. And I'm going to change the chart title to something more detailed. Call it the customer sex frequency distribution. And we can just leave this guy the way that it is. I mean, I could change this to 50s if I wanted to. It's not a requirement. It's just a possibility. It's up to you to determine what you want the information to look like. I'm going to shrink these guys down, so if you click on the table in one of the bottom corners, you can just hold them down and pull in to make them smaller, make them bigger. For now, I'm just shrinking it down so it's not standing in my way of all the information that I need to look at. We're just going to make them smaller so they're not taking up so much space. Now we got to break down the last part and visualize our customers by income level. Well, to do that, we're going to want several different bounds. Back on the info tab, going back over there one time, we want to count by 50,000. And you'll see in this template I already provided the upper income limits. Because the first range goes to 50,000, the second range goes to 100,000, the third range goes to 150,000, so on and so forth. I did that because I'm going to need to reference that in a second here when I make my customer income histogram. To do this, we are going to need the data analysis tool pack, which isn't by default in Excel, though it is free. So we can go and grab it. And to get there, you go to File, you go to Options, and on the left side, the second to last one is called Add-ins. Once you're there, you can go down to Manage Excel Add-ins and hit Go. And it's going to give you a list of options. And the one that you want is the top one, the Analysis Tool Pack. There's other stuff that's in here as well that you can add to click all of them. These are all the free extra tools that Excel has. The one that you want though is the top guy. So once make sure he's checked and hit OK. And that should install it. If you don't have it installed already, you'll know it's there by clicking the data tab on the top. And over to the right, the very top thing should say data analysis. I have Solver installed. Mine's a different one right now. We'll get to that later in the semester. So for data analysis, we've got to make a histogram over here of the different levels of customer income we have. Well, I'm going to click in here, and it's going to give me a list of all my options. And there's a ton of stuff in here. Correlation, covariance, Fourier analysis, like so many different statistical concepts that Excel can do for you. But the one that we want, which is already highlighted for me, is histogram. So I'm going to click that, and I'm going to hit OK. And when you do this, it always has the last time you used it, what the ranges were. It saves it. I don't know why. So step one, if you have something in here, you got to delete it all out. There we go. So the input range in this case is the information that we are looking for. We are looking for all of the income levels of our customers. I'm actually going to start with a label up here at the top in F1, and I'm going to grab all of that info. So F1 to F201. The bin range is how far your bins are, how wide they are, which is why I made this table. Because we can grab those numbers right there, H9 through H14 in this, and it gives us our range of bins. I used the upper income limit cell and the income in thousands cell here, so I want to make sure that my labels button is clicked. It'll make it easier to, when it makes the chart for you, to label the things automatically. And then down at the bottom, we have our output options. Output range is a cell in here somewhere where you'd want to put this information. If you want to, you can move it over to a new workbook by clicking this, and it'll put it on an entirely different sheet. I want to put it in here because I conveniently have a little header in this cell right there that is highlighted as you speak. So I'm going to go and I'm going to click on that cell, which is H17, and I am going to insert the numbers for my information there, but I also want a chart. So I'm going to make sure that the chart output box is checked on the bottom, and I'm going to hit OK. And when I do, all my information pops up in there. And we can see, in this case, that there were 40 people in our information set that made $50,000 or less. 132 made between $50,001 and $100,000, 18 between $100,000 and $150,000, so on and so forth. Let's find the relative frequency of each of these groupings. And it's the same way that we did it up above. You take the frequency for that particular bin that you have and divide it by the total size of your sample, which was 200 customers. So for the first bin, 0 to $50,000, I'm going to take the 40 people responded in that way, and I'm going to divide it by the 200 customers that we had in the sample. I'm definitely not going to want to click this in multiple times, so I want to set it up in a way where I can choose the fill handle to throw in the rest of my information, and that is going to be done in this case by making this 200 absolute. I want this number to change as I slide down, but I'm always going to be dividing by that 200 in that cell. So for J1 here, let's make it absolute. And you can do that by hitting the F4 key. You might have to hold down the function button when you hit the F4 key if you're on a PC, or the command button when you hit the F4 key if you are on a Mac, but it should look like that afterwards with a $ in front of the J and the 1. And I hit enter, and if 40 out of my 200 customers made $50,000 or less, that means that 20% of this sample of customers fell into that bin, that income level. And now with that, I can just drag down the fill handle in the corner and get the relative frequency for all of my groupings. And again, this information here shows the vast majority of the customers that this company has make somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 in income per year. Now we got our histogram over here, and we can pretty up our histogram a little bit. I'm going to stretch it out to make it a little bigger so we can work with this thing. What do I want to do? First, this frequency legend's not doing anything for me. I'm just going to click on him so he's highlighted like this, and I'm going to hit the delete button, and he's gone. Secondly, we have more as one of our options, and Excel, when you use the histogram function, by default does that. It's always going to make a more area that's for anything that's above your highest upper limit. but we don't have anything here, and there's no point in having a spot in my graph that is blank. So what I can do to get that out of here is I can just change the range. And what I'm going to do, as you can see right here, this is already highlighted because the histogram is using that information. I'm just going to grab in the bottom right hand corner this little square, so my cursor looks like this, and I'm just going to hold down my mouse button and slide up until it's not being highlighted anymore, and then it'll automatically change the cells. And now that looks much better that we don't have a big old blank on the end. For a histogram, different from a bar chart, your lines should be touching. So to do that, what you can do is click on any one of the bars, and it should put little blue dots around every single bar that you have, and once those are highlighted, right click on any one of them and go to Format Data Series. And here you have a gap width, which is how much gap there is between each bar. Well, if they're supposed to be touching, let's turn that down to a big fat 0. And now our numbers, our bars are stacked one against each other. Looking at this, I mean, you can definitely parse the information about how many exactly that there are in each spot. But, you know, you can always, if you want to, go to your chart elements again. And in this case, you can put in data labels, and it'll put the actual number right up above it, so it's easier to look at. Now all we got left to do is do a better job of labeling our graph so people can extract meaning from it. And I got a huge problem with this guy down here, upper income limits. For someone who doesn't know how to use the histogram function in Excel, that's not going to make a lot of sense to them. Let's label it again as instead, as something that's easier to parse for people using our information. I'm going to call it annual income. And I don't want people thinking that people only made $100 per year, so I'm going to put in parentheses in $1,000, just like that. And that looks much easier for me to read. Now I just got to label what it is, and we're going to call this on the top customer income level histogram. So we analyzed the information set. We determined that a larger part of our customer base is repeat customers. We determined that our customer base is predominantly male, and that our customers, for the most part, fall into this middle income range right here. And again, you can write that all out in a big old paragraph to conduct to somebody, but just putting a simple chart like this on the top makes it much easier to conduct and convey that information.